to attain proficiency in the art. He must begin with practice and details of word and phrase and figure, just as a musician begins with scales and finger exercises, and an artist with drawing from models. This is the natural order in every art. First, patient acquisition of skill and workmanship. Then, matured design or performance. It is recognition of this fact that in the course of rhetorical art, here traced, the part relating to style precedes the part relating to invention. If this distinction were made merely to justify the plan of a textbook, it would be of little consequence. It is made rather because the claim of style, with all its demands on the writer, is logically first and fundamental. Care for style is the mood that ought to control every stage of the work, projecting and the finishing alike. In every literary undertaking, and with a sense of its importance increasing rather than diminishing, the faithful writer's most absorbing labor is devoted to studious management of details and particulars, weighing of words, sifting and shaping of subtle turns of phrase, until with unhasting pains everything is fitted to its place. And the result of such diligence is increasing fineness of taste for expression, and increasing keenness for sense of all that contributes, in however small degree, toward making the utterance of his thought perfect. Ideal as this sounds, it is merely the rigorous artist mood applied to literary endeavor, nor is it anything more than becomes actual in the experience of every well-endowed writer. The constant pressure of an ideal standard engenders a certain sternness and severity of mood, which for the practical guidance of the student may be defined in these two aspects. First, an insatiable passion for accuracy, in statement and conception alike, which forbids him to be content with any word or phrase that comes short of his idea, or is in the least aside from it. Secondly, an ardent desire for freedom and range of utterance, for such wealth of word and illustration as shall set forth adequately the fullness of a deeply felt subject. The practical questions that rise out of this mood are deeper than the search for qualities of style, though also they include this latter quest. They are, in a sense, not questions of style at all, but of truth and fact. If the student of composition would be a master of expression, this earnestness of literary mood must become so ingrained as to be a working consciousness, a second nature. This is what is involved in giving style the first and fundamental claim. Chapter 1. Nature and bearings of style. Definition of style. 1. Style is manner of choosing and arranging words so as to produce determinate and intended effects in language. This is given as a working definition suitable to a course of study, not as including all the literary refinements of style. A distinction, general though not absolute, between style, which centers in manner, and invention, which deals with matter, has been given above. It is evident that the thought must be developed enough to contain some question of manner and effect before we can associate style with it. Bare facts could be exhibited in substantives, or formulae, or statistics, but this would not be style. It would display no degrees of effectiveness, nor would there be any interest in it beyond the thing that is said. A work characterized by style derives equal importance from the particular manner of saying a thing. There is a fitness, a force, a felicity in the use of language which adapts the thought to the language, to the occasion, and gives it dignity and distinction. By its style, the thought is made to stand out as adapted to act upon men. Note: to illustrate how much style may have to do with the effective presentation of a subject, compare the two following descriptions of the same thing. The one from an encyclopedia, simply giving information, the other from a romance, and told in the person of an extraordinary man of the people. The word is Avignon, the capital of the department of Vaucluse, France, situated on the east bank of the Rhone, in lateral 43 degrees 57 feet north, long 4 degrees 50 east. The Roman Avenue, call it the Windy City and the City of Bells. It is the largest trade in madder and grain and manufactures of silk, etc., and is the seat of an archbishop and formerly of a university. It was a flourishing Roman town, and is celebrated as the residence of the popes 1309 to 77, to whom it belonged until its annexation by the French in 1791. At that time, it was the scene of revolutionary outbreaks and of reactionary atrocities in 1815. The palace of the popes is an enormous castellated piped pile, built during the 14th century, with battlement towers 150 feet high and the walls rising to a height of 100 feet. The second account is laid at the time of the revolutionary outbreaks mentioned above. Quote, "At last I came within sight of the Pope's city. Saints in heaven, what a beautiful town it was! Going right up 200 feet above the bank of the river was a bare rock, steep and straight as though cut with a stone man's chisel, on the very top of which was perched a castle with towers so big and high, 20, 30, 40 times higher than the towers of our church, that they seemed to go right up out into the sight of the clouds. It was the palace built by the popes, and around and below it was the piling up of houses, big, little, long, wide, of every size and shape, and all of cut of stone, covering a space as big, I might say, as halfway from here to the carpenter's. When I saw all this, I was thunderstruck, and I thought I still was far away from the city, a strange buzzing. And though I was still far away from the city, a strange buzzing came from it and sounded in my ears. But whether it were shouts or songs or the roll of drums or the crash of falling houses or the firing of cannon, I could not tell. Then the words of the lame old man with the hoe came back to me, and all of a sudden I felt a heavy weight on my heart. What was I going to see? What was going to happen to me in the midst of those revolutionary city folks? What could I do among them? I, so utterly, utterly alone. From these examples, it would appear that we must enlarge our conception of what is involved in producing effects by means of language. If it meant merely setting forth bare facts of information, then writing like the first quoted paragraph would be enough. Rhetorical study would be learning to make catalogues and annals, and all excellences of style would be reducible to various kinds of painstaking. But while good writing includes this, while one of its most imperative aims is faithful transcription of fact, it includes with this also the writer's individual sense of fact. And this latter imparts it to the literary quality. The character and coloring due both to the intrinsic nature of the fact or thought itself and to the writer's own personality. Both of these relations of style require a few words of explication. Style and thought. It is a common notion among practical-minded people that the style of a literary work is an addition from without, as if the thought existed first by itself, and then someone who could manipulate words dressed it up for effect. To them, literature seems a trick and a trade, having to do with devices and ornaments of expression, or with cunning artifices of argument. This idea it is that so often weights the word rhetoric with reproach, and casts a slur on anything that is not expressed in the plainest and directest manner. But the truth is, if in good writing a thought is told plainly, it is because the thought itself is plain and simple, requiring only a bare statement for its full setting forth. If another thought is told elaborately, it is because wealth of word, illustration, figure, clever phrasing, and arrangement are necessary to sound its depths or to be just to its subtle shadings. To a trained sense, thoughts are essentially beautiful or rugged, dignified or colloquial, dry or emotional, containing therefore the potency of their own ideal expression. His aim is simply to interpret this character, whatever it is, and by making his word and phrase correspond thereto, to tell exactly and fully the truth that lies enwrapped in it. It is only for purposes of study and discipline that we regard style as separable from thought. It cannot be something added from without. Anything not required by the thought, brought in as a bit of finery or mere eccentricity, betrays its unfitness at once. For ideally the style is the thought, freed from crudeness and incompleteness, and presented in its intrinsic power and beauty, and the writer's effort is not directed to achieving a style, but to satisfying the demands of his subject in order to bring out in its fullness what is essentially there. Note: in the two descriptions quoted above, while both writers deal with the same basis of fact, the thought embodied in the fact as fits it, each case the object had in portraying the fact is different. In the first, the controlling thought is simply plain information. It gives numbers, measurements, statistics in a perfectly unadorned style. In the second, the controlling thought is the beauty and impressiveness of the city. It is the important on that account, and on account of its part in the story. So the style is colored and heightened to correspond. Style and the man. True as it is that the style is the thought, it is equally true that the style is the man. No two persons have the same way of looking at things. Each writer imparts something of his own personality, the coloring of his spirit or his moods, to what he writes, so that the vigor of his will, the earnestness of his convictions, the grace of his fancies live again in a manner of expression that would be natural to no one else. This manner of expression moves in its individual lines of thought, begets its individual vocabulary and mold of sentence, and is in fact the uncommunicable element of style. Note: in the two descriptions quoted above, there is a little, if any, suggestion of individuality in the first, because all of the interest is centered in the bare thought. The second is strongly colored by individuality. We read in it not only facts about Avignon, but the glowing interest of a man of the people, influenced by astonishment and awe. And if this is the feigned mood, still we see beyond it, in the author, a man of vigorous and penetrative imagination, whose clear mind realizes the vital contact of the soul with the world. It is evident, then, that a man cannot obtain a good style by imitating another man's style. It is his own peculiar sense of fact that is to be cultivated, and his own natural expression that is to fit with words. He may indeed get from the writings of others many valuable suggestion or inspiration for the management of his own work. He ought to be a diligent student of literature for this very purpose. He may, in common with his whole generation, obey the influence of some type of expression set by a vigorous thinker and man of letters. There are styles that he may admire and emulate, one for one quality, another for another. But any direct imitation is sure to be weak, affected, insincere. His one chance of success in style, as also his one road to originality, is to be frankly himself, having confidence in his own way of realizing truth and developing that to its best capabilities. Footnote: he who would write with anything worthy to be called style must first grow thoughts which are worth communicating, and then he must deliver them in his own natural language. 2. Adjustments of style and the culture that promotes them. 3 factors are to be noted as necessary in the perfect adjustment of any style, or any quality of style, to its purpose. To satisfy these is the work of skill and calculation in any particular case. These accomplish their end, however, not as labored effort, but as second nature. That is, the skill is so grounded and confirmed in the writer's whole culture that the adjustment makes itself. 1. The adjustment that recognizes the relation between style and thought. Just as there are different planes of thinking, so there are different levels of expression, from the stately to the colloquial, different colorings too, from that severity of word and phrase which centers in precisely defined ideas, to that unstudied ease or fervor which is the spontaneous mirror of personal feeling. Of all this, the nature of the thought is the first dictator. It is from a vital sense of thought and its prevailing tone that the fitting key of words and cast of sentence arise. The culture necessary to the perfect adjustment of style to thought is the culture of taste. Taste is to writing what tact and good breeding are to manners. Much of it may be native, the goodly heritage of ancestry and refined surroundings, but much of it is imparted, too, by one's companionship with cultivated people and with the best literature. By his daily habits of reading and conversation, if these are wisely cared for, a man may acquire almost insensibly a literary instinct, which enables him to feel at once what is false in expression and what is true. He is aware when words are eloquent and when they are merely declamatory. When a prosaic word or turn flats the tone of a poetic passage, when a colloquialism impairs dignity as well as when it adds vigor, when the unique word for a vital idea glows on the page or flashes into its questing mind. To profit by such culture is the real joy of literature.
Yeah.
2. The adjustment of the style to the conceptions and capacities of the reader. The need of such adjustment is suggested in the oft-made criticism that an orator speaks over the heads of his audience, that is too inflexible in his individual ways of thinking and speech, does not simplify the needs of others than himself. Every subject of thought, especially every scholarly subject, acquires as soon as it is specialized in vocabulary, point of view, a thought mold of its own. With these the writer moves in familiar acquaintance and intercourse. He thinks in their terms and technicalities, but the reader has to be introduced to them from the outside, has to apprehend their truths, if at all, in simplified expression. Much is done by the popular publications of the day to bring learned subjects into the life of ordinary readers. Still, much will always remain to be done. The problem that besets the thinker always is how to translate his thought into the language and conceptions of average minds. The culture necessary for the perfect adjustment of style to the reader is the culture of broad interests and of the knowledge of human nature. Every well-written book contains evidence that not only its subject, but the mind of its reader has been closely studied. To the masterful writer, an audience is always imaginatively present, even in the solitude of his study. He writes as if he were conversing with them, meeting their difficulties and adapting himself to their view of things. This is not what is called writing down to a reader. Rather, it is divesting hard thought of its technical dress and exhibiting in it the light of everyday standards. And it is in this direction that literature lies. The adjustment of the style of the writer's self, so that it shall be a true and spontaneous representation of his mind and character. The ability to make this so is by no means a matter of course. A writer's mind may be glowing with the beauty or greatness of a truth, and yet his attempt to express it may result, with his best efforts, only in frigid and stilted language. He may in conversation be perfectly fluent and natural, may tell a story capitally or conduct an argument with spirit and point, and yet write a pedantic or lifeless style. The reason is that he has not mastered his medium of communication. The mechanical work of putting down his thoughts absorbs so much of his energy that he cannot be free with a pen. His power over expression needs to be so developed by culture, needs to become so truly a second nature, that his written words shall be a reflection of his truest self, mind, and mood alike. Until such mastery is attained, his style belies, not represents himself. Evidently here is where the culture due to training and practice comes in. The most limpid and natural seeming style is simply the result of the finer art, which has become so ingrained as to have concealed its processes. Such art does not become unerring with the first attempt, nor with the second. It is the reward only of long labor and patient subdual of the rebellious elements of expression, until they become an obedient working tool, responding to every touch, and represent not only the writer's thought but himself in all the rich endowments of his nature. Cultivation of literary taste, of hearty sympathy with men and affairs, of skillful workmanship in language, a pretty well-rounded culture is thus laid out for him who would enter the domain of literary art. Such culture can employ as belonging integrally to its fullness not only a man's whole scholarship, however deep or various, but the power and effluence of his whole character. Three. The principle of economy. The foregoing ideals of style, with their various lines of adjustment and culture, may be reduced to one practical object, which, adopting the central idea of Herbert Spencer's philosophy of style, we may define as the economizing of the reader's attention. Note: following is the paragraph of Mr. Spencer's book in which the principle is set forth. Quote, on seeking for some clue to the law underlying these current maxims, we may see shadowed forth in many of them the importance of economizing the reader's or hearer's attention. To so present ideas that they may be apprehended with the least possible mental effort is the desideratum towards which most of the rules above quoted point. When we condemn writing that is wordy or confused or intricate, when we praise the style as easy and blame that as fatiguing, we consciously or unconsciously assume this desideratum as our standard of judgment. Regarding language as an apparatus of symbols for the conveyance of thought, we may say that, as in mechanical apparatus, the more simple and the better arranged its parts, the better will be the effect produced. In either case, whatever force is absorbed by the machine is deducted from the result. A reader or listener has at each moment but a limited amount of mental power available. To recognize and interpret the symbols presented to him requires part of this power. To arrange and combine the images suggested requires a further part, and only that part which remains can be used for realizing the thought conveyed. Hence, the more time and attention it takes to receive and understand each sentence, the less time and attention can be given to the contained idea, and the less vividly will that idea be conceived. End quote. If we take economizing the reader's attention to mean employing it to the best advantage, this theory of Spencer's requires a more extended application than he gives it. Some kinds of subject matter, too, require more strenuous attention than others, and there are various kinds as well as various degrees of attention for work. The following main applications of the principle are important to keep in mind. 1. The most obvious meaning of economy is giving the reader less to do. That is, making the words as plain and the grammatical construction as simple as possible, in order that the reader's energy, as it is not needed for interpreting the language, may be employed in realizing the thought itself. Everyone has observed the futility of a public address when the listeners have had to strain their ears to catch the words, or when the words are indistinctly enunciated. In the same way, every ambiguity that has to be resolved, every hard construction that has to be studied out, uses up just so much of the reader's available power for nothing. The thought, with all its interest and importance, suffers for it. Economy begins, therefore, with making the expression plain and easy. 2. But some thoughts are in their nature hard or intricate. Besides, what is too cheaply obtained is too little valued, in literature as in everything else, and frequently a thought is prized the more for some effort made to master it. This consideration creates no plea against simplicity of word and construction. That need is universal. But it suggests that in many cases it is true economy, instead of giving the reader less to do, to stimulate him to do more, to use such striking language as sets him thinking or awakens his imagination. This kind of economy is what dictates the use of vivid and suggestive language, picturesque imagery, and skillful phrasing and grouping of ideas. It is the economy which makes up in vigor for what it sacrificed to facility. 3. It is to be borne in mind also that by the very process of the thought of the reader's attention is continually being used up, it has to be maintained and reinforced. If an image is roused in his mind, if a train of suggestion is started, every such effect must be cherished and utilized, and here is room for the writer's wisdom. For a subject may be so exhaustively presented as to deaden interest. The reader is given no share in the thinking. It is true economy to leave something for him to do, to set him by wise suggestion on the road of the thought, and what to leave unsaid, and know what to leave unsaid. It is not easy to give directions for accomplishing this, depending, as it does, so much on the writer's delicate knowledge of men, but the fact is to be noted that it is an object to be had in mind. Footnote. To really strenuous minds, there is a pleasurable stimulus in the challenge for a continuous effort on their part to be rewarded by secure and more intimate grasp of the author's sense. Self-restraint, a skillful economy of means, that too has a beauty of its own, and for the reader supposed there will be an aesthetic satisfaction in that frugal closeness of style which makes the most of a word, in the exaction from every sentence of a precise relief, in the just spacing out of word thought, in the logically filled space connections connected always with a delightful sense of difficulty overcome. 4. The reader's aesthetic sense, his sense of congruity and fitness, is to be recognized and conciliated. It is using up attention for nothing when a word of ill connotation or a harsh construction, a crudeness of sound, or a lapse from tasteful expression is left for him to stumble over and make allowance for, readjusting mere assonances even, that they may soothe the reader, or at least not interrupt him on his way. Economy is not secured to the full until the intrinsic beauty of the thought, as well as its logical content, has undisturbed course and fitting language. Qualities of style. Determinate qualities of style, being merely the practical traits by which desired effects and expression are produced, manifest their needs in all literary work, and therefore underlie all rhetorical study. Under various names and applications, they will be constantly coming to view in the ensuing pages. The most comprehensive of them are here exhibited together, and some general means of securing them pointed out, in order that the present chapter may stand as the basis of reference and summary. The deeper conception. We call them qualities of style, but this they are only superficially. For what the writer is consciously working with, in any act of composition, is not qualities of style in themselves, but a rounded idealized thought, which he is concerned to express so truly that nothing of its intrinsic significance shall be lost. The significance, answering to nature and occasion, assumes some ruling aspect. It may center in the exact content of the thought, or in its interest and moment, or in its fine appeal to the imagination, or in all of these. According as he feels this intrinsic power, the writer will seek to give his thought such form and illustration as will bring it out, and thus, if adequate skill in work and phrase has been disciplined in him to second nature, the qualities of style come to themselves, attracted by his single-minded fidelity of the thought. Nor is it merely in the thought that we discern the potency of these qualities residing. It belongs primarily to the fiber of the writer's mind and the deep bent of his character. Through a clean and clear style is revealed a mind clean and clear, a nature too honest to let slipshod expression pass. The opposite holds, too, and a bemuddled mind or a shallow character betrays itself inevitably. Earnestness of conviction or the lack of it, grace or coarseness, are in the soul's grain. The style is their mental photograph. The qualities that the writer would impart to his expression he must cultivate in himself. Footnote. The classic utterance of this truth is Milton's. Quote, "And long it was not after, when I was confirmed in this opinion, that he who would not be frustrate of his hope to write well hereafter in laudable things ought himself to be a true poem, that is a composition and pattern of the best and honorablest things, not presuming to sing high praises of heroic men or famous cities, unless he have in himself the experience and the practice of all that which is praiseworthy." The following remarks on the relation of style qualities to character were inspired by a study of the mind and art of Tennyson. Quote, "Clearness in thought and words ought to be part of a writer's religion. It is certainly a necessary part of his morality. Nay, to follow clearness like a star, clearness of thought, clearness of phrase, in every kind of life is the duty of all." Stop and We have critics not a few who regard sweetness and strength as attributes of style, and are ignorant that they are not attributes of style, but attributes of mind and character expressed in style. Summary of the qualities. Corresponding to the main directions that a writer's endeavors for effect may take, the qualities of style reduce themselves to 3. Clearness, clearness, which answers the endeavor to be understood. Force, which answers the endeavor to impress. Beauty, which answers the endeavor to please. For all general aims in discourse, these qualities cover the whole range of expression, other qualities being interpreted as aspects of these or as applications of them to purpose more specific. Qualities of style. Number 1. Clearness. To be intelligible, to make oneself understood, is the fundamental aim in all seriously meant writing, an aim prior to and largely promotive of all others. Not only what is to add to the reader's information and knowledge, but whatever is to thrill his emotions or stir his fancy must come to him first through the brain, the thinking power. Hence the primal need for clearness, in conception and expression. So rigorously is this ideal of intelligibility held by conscientious writers that no word or phrase that would puzzle the dullest reader is willingly tolerated. The supreme aim is not merely style that may be understood, but style that cannot fail to be understood. No room for the lazy plea, not quite right but near enough, or for the arrogant one, I cannot write and provide brains too. The ideal is absolute, the occasion universal. To be clear, the writer must first be sure of a meaning, very definite and literal, and then say just what he means without seeming to say something else, or leaving the reader in doubt what he does say. And somebody else thinks that the secret of clearness lies in denotation. This requirement, so much easier to define than to satisfy, looks 2 ways, toward the thought and toward the reader, and accordingly, the quality of clearness takes 2 quite distinct aspects, each with its dominating usages and procedures. Precision, or clearness in the thought. Obviously, the first and paramount duty is to be perfectly true to that thought, to set it forth exactly as it is, whether hard or easy, simple or involved. With the plain conceptions and events of everyday life, this is no great problem. Ideas do not transcend the compass of the commonest words, but when it comes to strenuous and deep thought requiring close analysis and discrimination, evidently clearness and simplicity are not synonymous. An easy word for an abstruse idea, while it may produce a semblance of clearness, may actually becloud the thought more than it helps it. Some degree of difficulty, as exacted by the sphere of ideas in which one is moving, cannot be avoided. The only sure resource is to work for the exact setting forth of the idea, nothing else, nothing less, and the clearness thus obtained, whether ideally easily or not, will be a clearness of thought, yielding a shapely idea, or as it is called, clear-cut expression. Such precision depends mainly on the writer's vocabulary, the words he chooses to name his thought, rather than on the way words are put together. The following are the principal aspects that the endeavor for precise denotation assumes. 1. Choice of words for the sake of their unique aptness and the fine shades and degrees of meaning, their delicate implications and associations. 2. The judicious employment of helping and limiting expressions, such defining elements as are needed to fix the true sense and coloring in which the word should be understood. 3. Where the thought may gain by it, the juxtaposition of the words whose relation to each other, whether of likeness or contrast, throws mutual light. This may often be done so unobtrusively as to attract no special attention, yet be very effective for its object. While precision is the first and most incontestable object in style, the literary ideal is not too satisfied with being precise and nothing else. Too exclusive endeavor after precise Too exclusive endeavor after precision makes the style stiff and pedantic, like, for instance, a law document. This fault is, of course, to be guarded against. The words and colorings may be just as true to the idea, and yet the pains of choosing them to be so concealed that the reader absorbs the thought without realizing the perfection of the art. This is what a writer of true literary sense will work for. Hello. Perspicuity, or clearness in the construction. As soon as the claim of perfect fidelity to the thought is satisfied, the next step is to adapt the style to the comprehension of the reader. This, as has been just said, is practicable in different degrees, according to the intrinsic difficulty of the thought. But in all cases, the aim to be sought is the greatest plainness and simplicity of which the thought is capable. The derivation of the word perspicuity, denoting the property of being readily seen through, or as we express it by another word, transparency, is a just indication of this quality of style. Such simplicity of texture, such freedom from intricacy as it is, that we think of first under the general conception of clearness. It is not necessarily a bald or rudimental style. It may indeed be the backbone and support of a full, richly colored, even elaborate scheme of treatment, the unmarked source of his vitality and power. I drive your people away. This isn't good.
Come on.
Footnote.
They would love to hear you, but they're embarrassed. Bad about that.
He, the great author, may, if so be, elaborate his compositions, or he may pour out of his improvisations, but in either case, he has but one aim, which he keeps steadily before him, and is conscientious and single-minded in fulfilling. That aim is to give forth what he has within him, and from his very earnestness it comes to pass that, whatever be the splendor of his diction, or the harmony of his periods, he has with him the charm of an incommunicable simplicity. Newman said that. That aspect of clearness which we thus name perspicuity depends, as intimated above, for the most part on grammatical and logical construction, on the way in which the reader is kept aware of the mutual relations of words and phrases, and of their orderly progress in building up the sentence and paragraph. The following are the general aspects that such regard for structural assumes. 1. A keen grammatical sense, instant adjustment of all syntactical relations and connections of words, constant watchfulness against the two foes that most beset composition, ambiguity or structure that suggests two possible meanings, and vagueness or structure that cannot with certainty be reduced to any definite meaning. 2. Making sure that elements which are to be thought of together, whether as principal and subordinate, or as paired and balanced against each other, be so treated by expression and arrangement that the reader shall not fail to mark the relation. 3. Looking out for the joints and hinges of the structure, that no gaps be left unbridged, and no new thought be introduced too abruptly to produce its due effect. An ideally clear thought is clear moving, a continuous progress. While centering chiefly in construction, perspicuity is not unmindful of choice of words and figures, so far at least as to require the simplest words and the homeliest illustrations consistent with accuracy. To go farther than this, employing on the score of their plainness words and illustrations not discriminative enough, is to sin against the thought, and in the long run to deceive with a false semblance of clearness. Where such a clash between precision and perspicuity occurs, the only safety is in keeping to precision. The difficulty may, however, almost always be remedied, as we note in the usage of careful writers, by repeating hard ideas in simpler or more everyday terms. Clearness based on the intellect. As related to the writer himself, clearness, in its double aspect of precision and perspicuity, may be called the intellectual quality of style, the quality wherein we see predominantly the thinking brain at work, transferring its ideas fully and accurately to the mind of the reader. The training for this clearness, therefore, is just whatever best develops the thinking powers, in keenness and discrimination and grasp, in calm poise and judgment, but besides this there is also needed much patient and systematic culture and language, to subdue it perfectly to perfect flexibility and obedience. To him who has a passion for clearness, the vocabulary and the grammar are a veritable workshop, a source also of the sternest practical interest. Force. Clear and intelligible expression, being the staple, the backbone of composition, is of course to be cultivated first and most conscientiously of all. But the cases in which mere clearness is enough, without the aid of other qualities, belong to the relatively elementary undertakings of literature, those works in which the bare information or reasoned thought is all sufficient to supply the interest. But when the idea comes home more closely to reader and writer, when on the one hand it must gain a lodgment in dull minds or stimulate a laggard attention, when on the other its importance kindles the writer's enthusiasm or stirs his deep emotions, there is in it, or must be imparted to greater life than its merely intelligible statement would demand. The question of making it interesting and impressive comes to the front.